Hey, I'm the classical composer and poet Andrew Lloyd Fry, and this is an introduction to Arvo Pärt. So in this video I want to talk a little bit about his life and some of kind of the broad strokes events that have kind of shaped his music. Some specific things about his music and his style, and some specific pieces if you're new to him to start exploring. So first off, he was born in Estonia, which is a country right next to Russia, and in the 60s, he's pretty young. He's composing. I'm not sure if he's in his 20s or 30s at this point. And there's kind of this cultural control coming from Moscow about what you can and can't do and stuff like that as far as like composing. And he was doing 12-tone and serialism and these kind of weird collage-y pieces where he's mixing Bach and 12-tone. So there was a bit of butting heads and just kind of, hey, you're not allowed to do this, coming from this kind of like cultural control from Moscow. So it comes to a head with this piece called Credo. And that piece was very, actually different than stylistically. Its content was very Christian, and that just wasn't allowed. And that was kind of the tipping point where he's asked to leave this composers union, which was kind of like, that's kind of the place where you get performances and concerts. And it was kind of like, okay, now functioning as a composer almost is no longer an option. It got to the point where his music was banned in Estonia. So, he really experienced religious persecution because that was in his music and that wasn't allowed. So he moves to Germany, and there's kind of this like quiet period. I think there are some pieces that he wrote during this time, but I don't know if it's like 7 years or something like that. It's kind of this idea of like him in isolation and struggling with his, compositional voice and probably a lot of personal, emotional things. Like I'm sure that was like pretty crazy experience going through that. So then in the mid 70s, I believe it's maybe 76, he reemerges with a completely different compositional style. So very different than he's grouped in this category of minimalist composers like Philip Glass and Steve Reich and Terry Riley. That his early output was very, we could use the word modern, 12-tone and serial and dissonant, and then he goes through this kind of transformation and comes out with this very, very stripped down style. So another thing that's really interesting is, minimalism's going on kind of in New York would be the hub in the 70s. I'm assuming there wasn't cross influence. And a lot of the minimalist composers, like they knew each other, sometimes they were friends, and that kind of like cross pollination. And this is just like, this is this island, and maybe there's more there, but it feels like these things kind of grew up very separately, and then they had like a lot of similarities. So in the kind of the mid to late 70s, a lot of those pieces he wrote in that time period are his most famous works. So Für Alina, which we'll talk about, Spiegel Im, Spiegel, the piece dedicated to Benjamin Britten. A lot of these, even today, are his most popular works. And then kind of since then, he's exploded into one of the most known living classical composers. And it's interesting that he's a person like across the board that people respect. So like Radiohead and Bjork and Keith Jarrett and Steve Reich, and it feels like somebody that people in classical music like, people outside of classical music like, and there's just something really timeless and universal in his music and his compositions. So let's talk a little bit about his music and what makes it unique and some of those things. So it's a little bit different than the other minimalist. I would say pretty different, actually. So a lot of minimalists, especially early minimalists, had this kind of like shock value thing, where it's like, this is surprising how repetitive I'm being, and I'm shocking you. He doesn't have any of that. A lot of the minimalists would be a little bit more rhythmic, and he's real slow. He's like this walking quarter note pace, and the American minimalist, all of them have this jazz influence, so strong syncopation, tend to be even faster tempos like jazz. He doesn't have that at all. So the other thing is that kind of sets him apart is his music is constantly characterized by just like very, very peaceful, calm expression. And almost just everything he writes is that kind of like emotional place. And again, if we're comparing that to the minimalist, that's often not kind of the defining characteristic of those pieces. So a couple other things about his music. So you definitely hear a lot of really early classical music influence. So this is kind of like pre-Baroque. And pre-Baroque, it's like church music. So classical music was born in the church when notation was invented in the church. And like this Gregorian chant kind of stuff. So he spent a lot of time studying that, and you can hear that in his music. But it's interesting because it's not just reproducing that music. If he's just kind of recreating it, it's like, well, I might as well listen to the original, I might as well listen to those really old composers. But it's like he's taking that and mixing it with himself in a way that's like super fresh. Also, a lot of his pieces are spiritual or religious, and that's kind of what got him into trouble, and he didn't stop doing that. So he set a lot of biblical passages, often in Latin, and even his vocal music. He's done a lot of vocal music, but even the instrumental music feels very spiritual. And if you hear him talk about his music, he's often describing it with these like spiritual metaphors, and it's kind of like, oh, this is kind of like God and man struggling together, and God's this consistent thing, and man's kind of wandering around, and then they resolve. That's kind of the language he's continually talking about when he's describing his music. And then the last thing, if you read much about him, you come across this word, tintinnabulation. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's this super simple compositional technique that's really effective. And it's kind of like, oh, has no one ever done that before? Maybe not. And it's really simple, and it's kind of like finding this profound answer like right under your nose. So in really simple terms, it's like if we're like thinking about the piano, you have a chord in the left hand, and you just stick with that one chord, so 3 notes. So let's say it's like a C minor chord, and this will be brief, it won't get too technical. So it's like C, E flat, and G. And then in the right hand, you have the melody, and it's like moving around. And in its simplest, it's like this melody is moving around, and the left hand is just doing one of these 3 notes. And sometimes they're rhythmically tied together, so it's like whenever this goes down, one of these 3 goes down. So it's a really simple compositional technique, but it's stagnant harmony, that's kind of like a minimalist thing, but it's just a little bit more fresh and open. And if you just kept pounding this chord, it would get boring really fast. So it's like a really simple version of counterpoint, which is just like melody on melody. That's just really, really effective. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 of his pieces. So the first one is Spiegel Im Spiegel. So this is his most popular piece. It's been used in like movies and weddings and stuff like that. So Spiegel Im Spiegel means mirror in the mirror. So if 2 mirrors facing each other, it kind of makes this like infinite reflection thing going out. It's for piano and violin, and there's a bunch of different versions for it at this point. It's like piano and saxophone, piano and cello. There might be like 12 different versions. So the piano is just doing this really simple bass line chord arpeggio, and the violin is just slowly moving from note to note. So again, there's not really much technically going on, but it's extremely effective, very moving, very beautiful. If you want to learn more about that piece, I have an analysis of it. You can check that out. But again, this idea of like stasis and calm and like unchanging, unmoving and that's like the chords. And then the melody is like the thing that's moving. And I think constantly he's kind of using that as a metaphor for spirituality and God being this consistent, unchanging, eternal, and man kind of like moving around and trying to find like resolution with that. So first one, Spiegel Im, Spiegel. Second one is Fratres. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Fratres. So this is another piece for piano and violin, and it opens with just the violin by itself, and it's doing these rolling chords, which just, I love the sound of that. Just, it's a sound that I really, really gravitate to. So it goes by itself, and then it drops out and the piano comes in, and this whole time I feel like this piece is a little bit of this like dialogue or competition or struggle between the violin and the piano. And the piano is always very slow moving. It's very low in the bass at times. And the violin starts out very frantic and very active and very like even hyperactive. And it's like they keep going through these reiterations, and sometimes the violin, when they often after that they're playing together. And sometimes the violin feels like it's taking on a little bit of the characteristic of the piano and like slowing down and being calm. And then sometimes it's like the piano's calm and it's like middle hyperactive. And it kind of just keeps going through these reiterations, and it ends kind of into this resolution place of the piano and violin both playing very calm and slowly and gently, which again, this idea of like the spiritual reality in man and like hyperactivity and anxiety and peace and truth, and those kind of, that being this like cosmic struggle of humanity coming together. And then let's see, what was the last piece? Okay, the last piece was Für Alina, and this is the one where the tintinnabulation style is very much in the forefront. And in this one, it's a solo piano piece, and the rhythm of the left hand doing the one note of the chord and the melody are exactly tied together. And again, you just have note on note, so just like the melody note and one note in accompaniment, which is just super open. And I think there can be like a lot of just things can feel really fresh when you kind of open them up and get rid of some of that chord information. Okay, thank you for watching.